All right, so we're going to talk about the listing agreement today. And I thought I had another. One of the forms that I provided you was a listing template, WinForms, which shows somebody's old school because it's now called Zip Forms. Let me see if I can get this to come up. And boy, it's one of those days. It's just, there we go. Enter registration code. And it won't pull up right now. It's just, there we go. Micah is always laughing when she watches me. She's always got this smirk on her face when she sees me suffering at the front of the room. It's like, So, it's true. I'm glad I'm amusing you. So, yeah. So, this is a listing template, and it has just a short number of things that you might need when you list a property. What my goal was today is to go through the listing agreement itself, and then we're going to we'll talk about that. So what you want to do is create a template. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out. So this is what it would look like in Zip Forms if you're starting from scratch. You would click on the button that says New. I've already done this. But you would type, what I would suggest that you do to begin with is that you create a transaction called listing template. That's what I would suggest. Clicking on the listing button. And then what you would want to do is from that list that I gave you, add all those forms in. And then when you save it, you can save it as a template. When you go to, so I'll look at saving in a transaction, you can save it as a template. And what that would allow you the opportunity to do is to get a drop-down list like this so that you could just pick the template and it would add all that information in it. So there's two parts to creating the template, maybe three. One part is adding in all the forms from the list. The other part is what you want to do is in the worksheet or the cover sheet is you want to open up the cover sheet, and I've gone ahead and put in some, fake information about a seller and that sort of thing because it won't let me do anything without it. But you want to go to the page that says listing broker information, and you want to fill out that section so that it has the office name, the office number, all of that. You want to fill the whole thing out. And then once you've done that, you're going to save it, and we're going to save this whole thing as a template. And the way you would do that is when you click on that little drop-down arrow, there's a choice that says Save as a Template. So you've created all the forms that you want. You filled out all of your information. So the next time when you have a listing, you simply apply that template and all of your contact information will automatically be put in. All right. There are a lot of good reasons for doing this. Now, today we're really going to talk about the residential listing agreement. Before we do the residential listing agreement, what are we supposed to do first? Disclosure. So the first form, and the Civil Code does say that you're supposed to do agency disclosure first. There's a listing firm to seller, which is agency disclosure number 1. And then it should, I have my old friend Yeller the seller All right, they always say buyers are liars, but sellers are yellers. And you want to click on this. And I didn't fill out all the contact information, but if you had done so, all of this would be filled out for you, and it would automatically populate it. I didn't have time to do all that. So I'm just going to save that. And the agency disclosure is what you do first. Then we come to the residential listing agreement. Now, again, if the cover sheet had been filled out, it would have the name of the broker. It says hereby employees and grants. That would be name of broker, which would automatically be there. And then there's the beginning date. If they don't want to put the property into the MLS for a week, when would you start the beginning date?
No, today.
Today. It was a trick question. You would start it today. Well, what if they say, well, we don't want it to be shown for a week? What would you then use? And that form is called the authorization to exclude from the MLS. So we want to start the listing today, preferably. If they say, well, we're not ready, you should say, well, I understand that we don't have to start showing it right away, but when you hire me, I can start getting marketing materials and ordering other things and get the process started. In order for me to do that, you have to hire me. And then ending, so you would pick, what would be a good time period for this?
6 months.
90 days? How many listings are on the market for more than 90 days?
I'd say 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah,
6 months. Why not? Now, sometimes people find that 6 months sounds like a long time, so I oftentimes would suggest 180 days as the listing period. Right? But it's not nearly as long. You know, and if they say, well, I don't know, how about 24 weeks? Right? Just make it nice and simple. The assessor's parcel number, they want that. I don't know why, but they want that. All right. And again, all of this, my biggest tip, which I didn't have an opportunity to do myself, is to fill out the cover sheet. Right? To fill out the cover sheet.
So the name of broker will be Keller Williams.
Keller Williams Realty is about all it's going to allow you to put in. If you try to type in Keller Williams Realty Silicon Valley, it's not going to let you type in all that much. It'll shorten it. You could put in KW Silicon Valley, but well,
Smaller font.
so let's just see. Let me go here. So we're going to go to the cover sheet. So the selling broker firm. Now here, listing broker firm. All right, see that all fits, right? So we save it. We go back to the residential listing agreement. We look at the first page. It fits there. You're right, it does fit there. It doesn't fit on the purchase agreement. The purchase agreement will shorten it. Anyhow, so items excluded from sale. By the way, one of the things that I used to do was if I had a printed out copy of the listing agreement, and sometimes it's easier to work with a printed out copy because I used to want to take the actual listing contract out and lay it on the table so that they could see it. Now, I've had people say to me, you know, on the phone, they said, we're not going to sign anything tonight. And I understand. I'd show up and they would say, you know, we're not going to sign anything tonight. I understand. And then while we're talking, I pulled out the listing contract and I put it on the table. And they would say, and the reason I was doing this is I would take notes. So one of the questions that I always would ask people are, what items are you including in the sale and which ones are you not including in the sale? And when they answered me, I would start filling it out on paragraph 2. Now, the reality is this doesn't mean anything except for my information. It's what the purchase contract says that determines what items are being saved or going or which ones are not going. But do you understand? I have the form out and I'm writing on it. One of the things I learned, it's very hard to get somebody to sign an empty or blank contract. I used to try that. Say, could you just sign this? And then later we'll fill it in. They usually want you to fill it in first. This is sort of a general rule. The purpose is to get them to sign the listing agreement, and they're not going to sign the listing agreement unless you filled it out. So why not fill it out? If they said to me, sometimes people would say to me, what are you doing? They would say, what's that? What are you doing? And I'd say, well, this is the form we use when we list homes. They say, well, I'm not ready to sign a listing. I say, I'm not asking you to sign the listing. I'm just the kind of guy that I like to keep my notes in the proper place, right? On the proper form, the proper document. And so I'm just taking notes, on the right document. That's all. I'm not asking you to sign anything. Not yet, right? So do you understand? You might want to, this gives you an opportunity to write stuff in the form. Compensation to broker. Usually you put in a commission. Now, whatever you write in here is the total commission, including the selling and the listing side. Now, you could put in dollar amounts. If you're writing other stuff here, you may be doing it wrong. Just because one of the things I've noticed is people think that if there's an empty line, it probably requires that you write something on it. That's not necessarily the case. Right? You generally just want a commission percent, and you don't want to be writing in $5,000 if I sell it for more than $727, right? You just, you don't want to go there. Then it says in paragraph 2, this is what's called the broker protection clause, the broker safety clause. And I usually would just put in 30 days. I've never known of anyone who ever collected on this clause, so I wouldn't fight about it if somebody said, I don't want that. And what that clause basically says is that if you've been negotiating with somebody during the term of the listing agreement and you give their names in writing to the seller and they consummate a transaction with that seller within whatever time period you write in here, you still get paid. So some people, by the way, if it was a 180-day listing, would write in 180 days. That I found caused arguments with people. But usually if somebody's going to buy the listing, they're going to buy it very soon after the listing period. They're not going to wait months. So again, it has to be done in writing. You can read the paragraph yourself. By the way, one of the things I would suggest that you read this contract aloud. Yes, question?
Well, because it says or, you don't have to fill that out, right? Number 2, you could just fill out 1. You could say 6%.
No, that's not what it means. Yeah, you don't. Well, if you don't fill it out, you don't get anything. What does number 1 say? By the way, let me just make sure that everybody understands this. Number 1 is the best clause in this contract. It says, when do you get paid? If during the listing period or any extension, broker, that would be, count the number of ways you get paid. If you find the buyer, a cooperating broker, the seller finds the buyer, right? Any one of those 3, or any other person provides a ready, willing, and able buyer who's offered to purchase the property on any price and terms acceptable by the seller, provided the buyer completes the transaction, is prevented from doing so from seller. So number 1 says, if during the listing period the property sells, or not either or, but or if within 30 calendar days after the listing period or any extension thereof, somebody with whom you've had negotiations that you've disclosed in writing, right?
Okay.
All right. Those are 2 different ways. So you could, the first one is saying you're going to be paid if it sells during the listing period. The second one is what's called the protection period or the safety clause that says if somebody buys within 30 days. There's no set rule as to how many days. You could say 10 days, 20 days, 100 days. The number of times I've known anybody that sued and collected, but sometimes do you understand that there are people that might wait for the listing to expire to come back and negotiate, right? Yeah. This means they have to wait a while before they can do that. Or 3. Now 3 is a wonderful, it's wonderful. it says if without broker's prior written consent, the property is withdrawn from sale. Now, you understand the different ways you could be paid is one, if the property sells during the listing period or within 30 days after. Two, you'll be paid if it's withdrawn. Three, conveyed. Four, leased. Five, rented. Six, transferred. Seven, made unmarketable by a voluntary act of the seller. There are 7 ways you could get paid, and only one of them actually involves you selling the property being sold. Yes.
So when a listing expires and you were to call on that listing, you need to wait 3 days?
No, the 30 days.
Assuming they have that in their contract with these people?
It says unless not later than 3 calendar days, broker is given a written notice. But it says up to the end of this or any extension, after any cancellation, seller enters into a contract to convey the property, who is physically entered, for whom the broker or any cooperating broker submitted a signed offer, and then what it's saying is that the buyers, it doesn't say you can't list it for 30 days. It says that the seller dealing with a buyer that you've negotiated with, right? So,
You had your hand in the...
right. Right.
It's like if I'm the seller, you're my agent, and it expires, but while you were my agent, you brought in Rick, and then then it expires, and then Rick comes to
20
me,
days later.
Right.
and he tries to, then I go in contact with
The-
Rick, you still get paid.
As like a for sale by owner?
Well, right. So the reason for this rule is somebody will come and you show them property, and they know it's a 90-day listing, and they're looking at it at day 85. So what they do is, and you've been negotiating with them, but let's say that they're a little bit off on the price. So the buyer says, well, never mind. Maybe the buyer would, sometimes happens the buyer and the seller would talk. And they would say, why don't we just wait a week. Once the agent will be gone, we've already done all this other stuff. And then we'll come back and we'll make a deal. And the agent won't get paid. And then we'll use that money to pay for the roof that you want fixed. And for me to get the extra 10 grand I need. So that's what that contract is. But notice it says you have to, within 3 days, give them a written list of the people that you've negotiated with
To make that valid.
to make it valid. It just isn't anybody. So how many times has that happened, right? This doesn't, I wouldn't trip about this. I don't know of anybody who's ever collected on that clause.
So can I ask one question?
Sure.
You said you recommend to have the listing agreement signed on the same day or as soon as possible?
As soon as the day you're
Not wait
there.
until the house is
No. What you do is you sign the listing agreement right now. That allows you to get started working, developing marketing materials, ordering inspections and reports. But there's an authorization to exclude from the MLS that we would use to delay it going, so they don't have to put it in the MLS right away. All right. So C said, then paragraph B, which virtually nobody ever collects on either. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that all the time. But what paragraph B basically says is that if the buyer were to default and lose their deposit as liquidated damages, the broker gets half. That's what it says. Yeah. And then paragraph C says, in addition, seller agrees to pay broker. You shouldn't be writing anything in there. All right. Then paragraph D, in the old days, it was just not as obvious. Plus, I guess it's possible for you to not check any things. But basically what this is asking is, how much are you paying the other agent? So if this were a 6%, we would put in 3. Now, what sometimes agents do is they don't want to put in anything so that they could make it different later. So does everybody understand what I just said? So let's say it's a 5% commission, and you decide that as the listing agent you want 3, and you're going to give 2 to the agent who represents the buyer. Now, do you think the seller understands that's your intent?
No.
Probably not.
By not filling it in?
Well, that's right. So but it's, if you don't fill it in, some agents don't want to fill it in so that they can do whatever they want to later. The problem would be is, let's say you got sued, and your fiduciary duty is to represent the seller's best interest over your own. And if you don't offer enough commission to an agent representing a buyer, is that possible that it would discourage other agents from actively trying to sell your listing? Is it possible that the best buyer for the house didn't see it because you cut the commission? You also are going to have the problem of explaining why you weren't clear with the seller who was getting paid what. And the obvious inference is that if they knew, they would have objected. Right? Did you understand? So what my recommendation is that you click on the box and you put in the commission that you're going to give to the other agent so that the seller knows and it's clear. Seller is, and then paragraph E just says the seller agrees that in escrow that you'll get paid. F says seller represents that seller has not previously entered into a listing agreement with another unless as follows. Have you ever listed the property before? Is it possible that somebody might say, well, I have a listing, it was listed, but it's expired, or it was canceled. And then it turns out that it wasn't canceled. Now, expired or withdrawn, let me put it this way. If the listing is simply withdrawn, the MLS will not allow you to relist it. In other words, they'll know when you put in the APN number that it's already an active listing. It has to have expired or be canceled in the MLS, or they won't even let you put it in. Is it possible that it was canceled in the MLS, but that the previous listing agent didn't actually cancel the listing?
Yes.
Right. That's,
Become a pocket listing?
well, it becomes just a messed up listing. A pocket listing is when you don't put it in the MLS.
There's not in the MLS anymore.
I know that, but sometimes that doesn't mean that they've done an official cancellation agreement.
Or it's canceled because it's off the market for a temporary reason.
Right. But technically, if you're taking it off the market for a temporary reason, you're supposed to withdraw it. But agents will cancel it because the intent is to put it back into the MLS, and they want to reset the time clock for the days on market. And so instead of putting it down as a withdrawn for 30 days, they'll cancel it and relist it. So what that would mean, though, is that if you were another agent, is it possible the seller might be confused and might say, well, I don't know, he told me he canceled it. And then you go and put it into the MLS, and the MLS takes it because it was canceled, but that listing agreement was never canceled. So would it be a good thing to have a discussion with the seller about when was the last time you listed this home with anybody? And if it was recent, I would say, do you have a copy of it? Can I look at it? So that's what we want. We want to have that conversation. 2 says seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay commission to any other broker regarding the property unless the property is transferred to any of the following individuals or entities. Does anybody remember a discussion about the written notice for 30 days? Anybody remember that? Broker protection, broker safety clause. This is what that's referring to. It's saying, has your previous agent given you a list of names? What is that list of names? And then paragraph 3 under F says if the property is sold to anyone listed above during the time the seller is obligated to compensate the other brokers, broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement. So basically this is saying is now, by the way, let me just make sure these two are clear. F1, could you sign a listing agreement with a seller who currently has a listing agreement on the property?
No.
Let me repeat it again. Could you sign a listing agreement with a seller who currently has a valid listing agreement on the property? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. But the answer is yes. Now, could you begin your listing agreement the day after their listing agreement expires? If you look at expired listings, right, this is just an interesting thing to do. Run all the listings that expired last month and look and see if they were relisted, how often they were relisted with another real estate office, and how long it took for that other real estate office to appear in the MLS as their agent, and you'll find most of them, it's the next day. Well, how did they do that? Well, they talk to them. So let's say a seller is unhappy with their agent and they call you up and they say, "Hi, Kitty, my agent Libby's doing a really terrible job. And thank God it's almost over, right? Her listing is up in August and it's not going to sell. So what we want you to do is take over when her listing expires. Can you go and meet with them and sign a listing?" The answer is yes. Did you solicit their business? No. Not really. They solicited you. So what happens, that's what paragraph F1 is referring to. What happens if Libby does sell it before the end of the month? Then you're not entitled to a commission. Right? So F1 means it's already been listed with another agent, but it hasn't expired yet, but it's going to be. F2 means that there's the written notice of people that they've negotiated with under the broker safety clause. And F3 says if either of those result in the sale being consummated, you're not going to get paid. Yes?
So I guess the verbiage in there, if they had a listing already and they're just waiting for it to expire, it would say something like, unless specified as so. I'm talking about F1. It would say MLS listing to expire.
Something like
blah,
that.
blah, blah.
Right. You'd put in the MLS number.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
MLS number.
But a lot of times listing agreements are signed with people that have listings already, but they're about to expire, and your date would start after theirs expires. You get a different MLS number. It's a different company. Totally different MLS number. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand that? All right. So, number 5 is the multiple listing service. And they want you to put in the name of our multiple listing service. What is the name of our multiple listing service? MLS listings. Which I know people get confused when they're saying, well, many people have trouble believing that's really the name of our multiple listing service. Hey, we're in Silicon Valley. They grab the name right away. So, and it says, otherwise, and it's possibly others unless otherwise instructed, property listed with the MLS above. That MLS is, or if checked, is not the primary MLS for the geographic area of the property. So let's say the property is in Fremont. All right, can I list it?
Yes.
Is MLS listings the primary MLS for Southern Alameda County? It is not. Are there more listings in East Bay MLS, Bay East, than there are for Fremont than there are in MLS listings? The answer is yes.
I might have done something wrong.
Plausible deniability. Now, by the way, is it possible for you to do what's called a reciprocal listing in that other MLS? Put it in there too.
Yeah.
Answer is yes. Would they get more coverage? Now in our market, whether or not this is a big deal or not, it's becoming less of a big deal because we can search their MLS and they can search our MLS, right? But if I'm in Castro Valley, I'm using Bay East MLS and I'm running all the listings in Fremont and you're in MLS listings and you put it only there, it's not going to show.
So if I have a listing in Sacramento, I can put it in our MLS, but also can.
You also should, if you want to do a good job and get it sold, you should put it in Metro List, which is the MLS for Central Valley, including Sac of Tomatoes. Do you think that agents have ever sort of misrepresented that they've basically said, well, it's going to go in the MLS, don't worry about it, that without actually explaining it's not going to go into your MLS, it's going to go into our MLS. And, yeah, that MLS is, or if checked, is not. So if you check it, all terms of the transaction, including sales price and financing, if applicable, will be provided to the MLS. And so basically, what it says is that you have reporting duties. Now, this box, by the way, it wasn't that long ago the box didn't exist on this paragraph. The paragraph existed, but not the box, nor were those signatures. But as people have done more of what are called pocket listings are also sometimes referred to as exclusive listings. They're not in the MLS. They want you to get the seller to initial that they've, in fact, read this box, which basically says you're leaving money on the table if you don't put it in the right MLS. Right? By the way, one of the things I used to do, now this is just, when you get busy, this becomes a more, it becomes an easier thing to do, but anything that was not in our MLS, I would refer. Right? And I have to admit, I've sold homes in Fremont, but I did the reciprocal listing in that MLS. But if it wasn't in my MLS, I usually would refer it to somebody, let them do all the work, send me a referral fee, and not have to drive to Berkeley or wherever. And I've worked with agents who had listings in Fresno, in San Francisco, right? And they would run and get in their car and drive for 3.5 hours to go to Fresno to unlock the door to do something, then get in their car and drive 3.5 hours back. And my thought always was, if they spent that time talking to people about real estate, maybe they could get a listing around here and not have to drive to Fresno all the time. But but you're welcome to do it. I would just make sure what's important is that the seller understand that you're not putting it in that MLS, and the best thing to do is to put it in that MLS too. It's called a reciprocal listing. There's like a fee, but now you're in the big MLS that everybody is using in that area.
But you also can co-list it with somebody.
You could co-list it with somebody that's there too. Yeah, then you don't have to go through all this. You don't have to worry about local disclosures that you have no idea about, right? I had a guy that wanted to list a home with me in Tahoe, and I kind of like going to Tahoe, but they have a different purchase agreement in Tahoe. They have their own disclosures in Tahoe. I didn't want to join the Tahoe Association of Realtors and learn their contract and disclosures. Yes.
I understand the overarching difference, but what's the kind of day-to-day difference between referral and co-listing? If it were someone local.
The difference between referral and co-listing is oftentimes the amount. That's probably, co-listing generally implies you're doing it on a 50-50 basis. But most, I would, if depending on how busy the person is, they would probably want to just pay you a referral fee. Because what are you going to do? What are you going to actually do?
Also, how much you're involved.
Right, how much you're involved. Co-listing means you're supposed to do half of the lifting.
So my consideration was, you have it on when somebody looks you up on the MLS, at least you have a transaction.
Right, you can work it out yourself. Basically, it comes down to negotiating a percentage of the other person. Either way, if you refer it, it's in their thing too. But you could list it in Sacramento. You have to go through the reciprocal process with MetroList. All right. It's a lot easier to sell things in San Jose, Santa Clara County. MLS rules provide that broker vacant lots and residential real property vacant lots be submitted within 2 days. This is the paragraph that refers to the MLS exclusion form. Right. Basically, it says that you're supposed to put this in right away, or they have to sign another form, which you want them to do. And then this big, long paragraph basically explains that their property is going to be on the internet. The only way for it not, with all this information, is for the broker to do another form, which is the election. It's another form that basically says we don't want it on the internet. Considering that almost 100% of all buyers start at on the internet, I would, very few sellers don't want their home on the internet. But if they don't want their home on the internet, you have to get them to fill out another form that says they don't want it on the internet. If they're not going to put it on the MLS, that's a form. If they're not going to put it on the internet, that's another form. How are we doing? Paragraph 6 on the next page. Zipping along. Seller representations. Basically, you ought to read this. And by the way, one of the things we're going to practice, if not next week, but eventually, is we're going to practice explaining this form to each other. By the way, I would recommend that you spend some time reading the form aloud. Right? You ought to read it at least 8 or 10 times aloud. You ought to practice reading it aloud every day until you get good at it. One of the things that you have to think about is when you're explaining it to somebody, the chances are very good you're going to have to do it upside down. You're sitting on one side of the table, or off to the side, and you've got the form in front of you, and they're sitting there looking at it, and you need to have the ability to point at different paragraphs and say, that's what this paragraph means. You understand? If you can't do that, if you can't find things in the form, you can't pronounce the words in the form, it looks to them like you've never read the form, it's going to be harder to get them to sign the form. Right? Just think that your doctor is fumbling with the equipment and doesn't remember what it's called. Right? What would your conclusion be? Gotta go. All right. So what you need to be able to do is to look at this, and this basically says, this paragraph says, are there any notices of default or any litigation that you know of about the property? This is a question you'd ask. Because what this is representing, that if there's a notice of default, a bankruptcy proceeding, government investigations, if there's any litigation, anything like that, now's the time to tell me. Right? Paragraph 7 is broker and seller's duties. It says the broker agrees to exercise reasonable effort and due diligence to achieve the purposes of this agreement, unless seller gives broker written instructions to the contrary. This is, by the way, a mystery clause that many real estate agents don't know exists. It says broker is authorized to order reports and disclosures as necessary, advertise and to market the property by any method and in any medium selected by the broker, including MLS and the internet, and to the extent permitted by these media, control the dissemination of information submitted to any medium. And then this is the part that I happen to like. And 3, disclose to any real estate licensee making an inquiry the receipt of any offers on the property and the offering price of such offers. Have you ever called a listing agent up and asked, do you have any offers on the property? And they said, I'm not going to tell you. Or if you ask them, what's the highest price you've got? And they say it would be illegal, immoral, and unethical for me to tell you that. Right? Most of these, now I've had some people, when I point this clause out to them, say, when did they add this? I've been doing this class for a really long time. I don't remember. Right? This isn't a new clause. It's just that many real estate agents have never actually read the listing agreement. What does it say? Does it say that it is illegal for you, immoral or unethical for you to tell agents inquiring what the highest offer is? Disclose to any real estate licensee, make an inquiry, the receipt of any offers on the property and the offering price of such offers. Unless, it says here, unless seller gives broker written instructions to the contrary. That's what it says. So, by the way, if it was my listing and you called me up, I was probably going to tell you that the highest price was. Right? Because I'd have people say, well, we were thinking about offering $480, and I'd say, don't even bother. I've got a 530 already. Right now, why do I want a 480 offer? Why do I want a 480 offer? Right, to go at the bottom of the pile. By the way, they might say, well, we're going to come in at 530. There's a chance they might come in at 535. I just made $5,000 for my client. By the way, what I was going to do if there were multiple offers, I was probably going to counter the top three anyhow and raise it a little by the highest one. Right? So you understand now, by the way, if you're representing a buyer, arguing with the listing agent over this is probably not going to help you. Right? Because when they say, I'm not allowed to tell you that, and you say, you're wrong. How stupid. My coach says you've never read the listing contract. But could you have this discussion with the sellers? Right? Would this be a good place to have a discussion with the sellers? Because it says that you're going to order inspections and reports and those sort of things. That's what it says. And that as offers come in, I used to say my job is to bid them up. Right? You know, and I'm going to tell them, unless you tell me not to, I'm going to tell them what the highest bid is and tell them to beat that price.
So Mike, it would be obviously unethical to lie about the highest price.
Right, you don't want to lie. That can backfire. It's always better to tell the truth when you don't know if it's going to help, at least.
Yeah, I know, but so it's definitely unethical. But is it illegal?
Illegal. It's not a criminal act to lie to another real estate agent. If it were, the offices would be emptied. The white buses would be picking us up for at every office.
I was thinking more from the buyer's side. I'm worried that maybe they're lying to me.
They might be, but you see, my thought about that is that if I lie and say I have a 530 when I don't, it might just scare you away, and you might have made the best offer. So, and I don't know. So I just figured it was better to just tell the truth.
Yeah, I would never lie about it. I think
Right.
that's a disgusting thing to even think about doing. But I just don't. Yeah, exactly. So.
Right.
Okay.
So the idea is you tell the truth. You should have a discussion. Who decides whether or not you should tell the price to other agents that are inquiring? The seller, right? Isn't that who should decide? Don't listen to what agents. Most real estate agents learn their real estate on the street, right? Right. They huddle at street corners, smoke cigarettes, and swap stories. Isn't that what they do? Seller agrees to consider offers presented by broker and act in good faith to accomplish the sale of the property. Right? Yeah, that's what it says. Act in good faith to accomplish the sale of the property. By other things, making the property available for showing a reasonable time, subject to paragraph 4F. And then the hold harmless clause, which is this last paragraph, basically says if the seller lies or fails to disclose, and we pass that on, that they're responsible for a lawsuit against us. Deposit says brokers authorized to accept and hold deposits upon my behalf. That's the seller's behalf. Agency relationship, you've already done this, but notice it says the broker shall represent seller. Possible dual agency with buyer. Basically what that says is that it's quite possible that either you or Keller Williams Realty San Jose, Silicon Valley, might find the buyer, and if we find the buyer, then we, in the royal sense, we are representing both the buyer and the seller. Right? But you might want to find the buyer too. Is it possible that we'll be representing other sellers? Now, both of these involve there's a longer disclosure form that we went over. Remember that Lindsay and I didn't we do something about disclosures? And this is confirmation of agency, security, and insurance. This is a good thing to talk to people about. Is it possible that stuff could get stolen during an open house or even by a showing? Should they lock up valuables? Should they make sure they have the necessary insurance? Right? How about if they have guns and stuff like that? Should they lock them up, move them out?
Depends on how negotiations go.
That's right. You might need it. Photographs and internet advertising. Now, by the way, nobody's asked me this question yet, but I oftentimes get asked, did you really go through all of this with people? And the answer is yes. I actually would explain to them what the listing agreement said, unless they were such a high D, right, that they were obviously irritated that I was explaining anything, and they were holding the pen saying, where do I sign, where do I sign, right? If that's the case, point to where they sign and tell them to sign. But otherwise, most people, it's a good thing to discuss this. Photographs and internet advertising, do they know that their property, including its address and photographs of the inside and outside, are going to be on the internet for all to see?
Also, what it says that someone who comes to an open house can take photos.
Right. And people that are showing the property can take photos. How do we stop them? Have jamming the equipment that prevents their cell phones from working while they're at the property? So this says, in order to effectively market the property for sale, it is often necessary to provide photographs, virtual tours, and other media. Buyer, seller agrees to, or if checked, that broker may photograph or otherwise electronically capture images. By the way, studies done by the National Association of Realtors and Realtor.com find that properties with more than 10 pictures and properties with virtual tours get more clicks than properties that don't have it. If you were a buyer and you saw the little virtual tour icon next to a property, would you be more likely to click on it than one that didn't have it? Seller acknowledges that buyers or other persons may take photographs, videos, or images of the property. And the seller understands that we have no way of stopping this. That's pretty much what it says. 12 is the key safe lockbox. So what do you say if the owner says, well, I don't want people coming into the property at all hours of the night?
As long as you can control the time, know when the lockbox will unlock the key. And two is you can have the lockbox just inside the door and you put it out when you leave. It's okay for people to see the property.
How early will, if you, let's say you don't do anything to the lockbox or log into the computer system, what's the earliest somebody could access it? What?
8 a.m.
I think it's 8.
Yeah, it's funny. I went to see a place really early.
And it wouldn't let
It
you
was
in.
like 7:58. I wanted to get there before my
Right.
client. And I was like, well, it's
It won't let you in. And I believe it also, the end time is 10 o'clock. So would that be a good thing for you to know that you could explain? Is it possible that you could,
actually adjust it.
you can actually adjust it? So if somebody, you could say not until 10 to whatever. Now, taking it inside and living it outside, I eventually went to the trouble. I went to Home Depot and I bought at Home Depot, they sell these really long cables. These are really strong cables covered in plastic with little eye things at the ends. And the reason is that if you take it and just leave it on the doorstep, have you ever seen agents who just leave it on the doorstep? They will disappear. Right? It's just a matter of time. And I've heard people say, well, nobody can get into it. Nobody would get anybody. Or there's some kid who knows is just going to take it and then find out later they can't get into it. And how much does one of those babies cost? $140. How much is a cable from? So the other reason for the cable was sometimes the only water pipe or other easy to attach to thing is located in a bunch of thorns, right? Where the faucet leaks and there's mud, right? So I went and I bought some of those long cables, and if there was a pole or anything, you'd go right around the cable. Lockbox goes through it. They'd have to remove the post, the column, or whatever I'd connected it to. Now it's far enough away from the property that anybody can open it without being, a contortionist. And if you leave it out in front, it will disappear. Can you tell who's showed the property? Would this be a good thing to explain at this point how the lockbox system works? Okay. A sign, you're going to put a for sale sign on the property. Additional terms, you don't need to write anything in here. Management approval, broker may not like it. Dispute resolution is mediation and arbitration. And what I used to say to people, by the way, the CAR has a little brochure that you can print out that explains mediation and arbitration if you want to take it with you and leave it with them. My explanation used to be that mediation is like marriage counseling. Right? You go to the marriage counselor says, you shouldn't smoke cigars in the house. Right? And the wife says, I like to smoke cigars. So I'm not stopping. Right? Do you have to do what the marriage counselor you have to do what the marriage counselor says? Do you have to do what the marriage counselor says?
No.
No, you don't have to do what the marriage counselor says. Then if that doesn't work, there's arbitration. That's divorce court. Right? You have to do what the divorce court says. You betcha. For years and years and years. I'm not going to get into that. So there's a place for them. By the way, in Santa Clara County, these kinds of things would go to arbitration anyhow. The only difference is that this is binding arbitration. And binding arbitration means that you can't appeal it, essentially. There are lawyers that'll say, I don't want to, then they don't initial it. Right.
So if the seller didn't initial it, the buyer sees that.
The buyer's not going to see that this is not the purchase agreement, this is the listing agreement. When would this become an issue if we're suing them for our commission? All right, or they're suing us to get out of the listing. This is not a purchase agreement. The purchase agreement has another place for it. This is just between us and them. And I don't know what the office policy is if somebody won't initial this. I managed a large group with lots of agents. We had over 500 at a time for a really long time, and we never went to mediation or arbitration on a listing, right? Because you just cancel, and then you don't need to deal with it, right? But it's purchase agreements that are more volatile. Then this is the entire agreement, ownership and title. What this paragraph says, this is 21, is there anybody else that has an ownership interest in this property? If so, who are they? And those of you that went through my real estate school may have learned that you only need one signature if it's community property to list a home. That's true according to the California Civil Code. It is not true according to MLS regulations. MLS rules say that everybody that's on title has to sign, and that no other person have title to the property. Seller has authority. If you look in the MLS rules, they'll fine you if you have a listing signed by one spouse and not the other, and it's community property, right? And if you tell them that you learned in real estate school you didn't have to do that, then it's not going to help, right? California law only requires one spouse to sign a listing. Our MLS regulations require two.
How about if it's sold separate property?
Well, if they're community property is what I'm talking about. Sold and separate property does not require the other signature.
So if they lie to you, you have to look up who is on title.
Well, who looks up who's on title? The title and escrow company. Right? I never tried to do other people's jobs for them, and they'd be hurt if I did. So I would let them look it up. And you may have told the story. I had a client. I'd sold one of the homes. I'd listed 3 properties that she owned. There were 2 names on title. I said, "Who's this? Who's the other person?" She said it was her deceased husband. Her husband. She said he died over 10 years ago. Apparently that was wishful thinking on her part. And we had already closed one transaction and were in escrow on the second one when he came to light. And yes.
This formal edition places for 2 sellers. What if there's more than that?
What happens if there's more than one? There's a form called additional signatures addendum. By the way, one of the things you ought to do is look at all the forms, right? When you're at the open house on a Wednesday, right? Because it's a vacant, right? Or at Mirabella at the middle of Sunday afternoon. It wouldn't hurt for you to just look at all the forms, and spent the time, but that's an additional signatures addendum. So, and by the way, in the worksheet, you want to fill out as much of this information as possible, including their email address. And the reason you want to make sure the email address is in the system is so that you can send them electronic signatures on stuff. So you're not driving all over for them to sign some simple little addendum. Right. And make sure that, you know, and Lindsay is going to help you with a lot of the heavy lifting. So seller advisory, yeah, I would go through this with people. It talks about general disclosures and statutory disclosures. We've already done the disclosures, death and other disclosures. Has anybody died in the last 3 years? That's on the SSD, which stands for the seller statutory disclosures. It's also, which is part of the seller property questionnaire, the SPQ. Contract, withholding of taxes, pre-marketing considerations. I always like this form because notice what it says under pre-sale considerations. You can consider doing what you can to prepare your property for sale, such as correcting any defects or problem. Many people are not aware of defects or problems in their own property. One way to make yourself aware is to obtain professional home inspections. That's what it says. It's part of the seller advisor. Paragraph 4A. Yeah, 4A. Many people are not aware. One way to make sure you're aware would, how about this? All right, so I'll just do the whole, the whole thing. So this truer words have never been spoken, including termites. By doing this, you then have an opportunity to make repairs for its offered for sale, which may enhance its marketability. Keep in mind, however, that any problems revealed must be disclosed. This is true even if they get their own inspections. I always wanted to get every inspection I could, because the reason why escrows don't close oftentimes is because the buyer finds, there's two reasons why an escrow is not going to close. One is buyer's financing, or number two, there's defects that the buyer discovers during escrow that they did not know. By the way, as an aside, this is what I used to say to sellers. I would say to them, if we get all the inspections and reports and disclosures and we get them all done in advance, and we provide it to the buyer in advance of them making an offer and get a receipt from the buyer with the offer, then the buyer cannot back out based upon what's contained in those reports. The purchase agreement inspection contingency is about the buyer finding things they did not know. It does not cover things they already knew. So the more they know before they make the offer, the less wiggle room they have to get out. Wouldn't that be a good thing for them?
So would that also include that they couldn't say that they wanted out without any recourse based on inspection information if you gave them? That's
correct. I actually had a buyer that wanted out for, I don't really know why, but he wanted out, and the agent didn't understand this, and they said, well, there's section 1 work. I said, well, you got to copy that before you made the offer. Well, so what? We disapprove. Well, no, right? And you see, from the buyer's point of view, if you don't do this, a buyer has a legitimate reason to renegotiate the price or get out, because they're going to say, when we offered you $750, we did not know that there was $15,000 worth of section 1 work. We didn't know that the electrical panel is not up to code. Right? We didn't know that, right? So now they have a legitimate reason for renegotiating. If they knew that when they made the offer, that's not a reason for them to renegotiate. Right? This is a big deal. By the way, one of the other things, look at the next one, which is also one of my favorite topics, post-sale protections. And this talks about a home warranty. So I used to take with me home warranty brochures, and I would show them to the seller, and what I would talk to the seller about is something called seller's coverage. And what seller's coverage does is that it starts the home warranty protection during the escrow period, during the listing period, during the listing and the escrow period. How about that? So if during the listing the dishwasher breaks, they can make a service call and have it fixed. Then we would provide, and by the way, if you, as an agent, you could offer to pay for the seller's protection for the home warranty if you wanted to offer something to the seller. Right? When we do practices on listing presentations, one of my theories was something that I heard from somebody else called differentiate or die. Right? Be different, and I used to talk about seller warranties. Because what happens if something breaks during the listing or during escrow? What is the seller's responsibility? If it's during escrow, the seller has to fix it. Because the purchase contract says the property has to be delivered to the buyer in essentially the same condition it was when they made the offer. So if something breaks, the seller has to fix it.
Does that transfer? Can you transfer it to the buyer?
Yeah, that's what you do. That's exactly what you do. You talk to Art from Old Republic Home Warranty. He'll be that's the
So you buy it for your seller,
right.
and then you offer that as part of what.
Right. And when do you have to pay for it?
Right. But
Escrow.
you can say.
When escrow closes. What if escrow doesn't close?
Well, they have no more.
I guess you don't have to pay for it.
You don't have to pay for it then. Ask Art, but the answer is no. You don't have to pay for it then. Right. Don't have to pay for it then. And in fact, what's interesting about seller's coverage is nobody's paid for it at this point. Nobody's paid anything, but the coverage is in effect.
But you pay for it in escrow.
But you pay it when escrow closes, and of course, what they're hoping is that you'll do it for the buyer too. So then, would it make the property more marketable? And this is not a huge deal that the seller's providing a home warranty.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe this is going too far outside the scope, but, so what if you have seller's warranty, you're the listing agent, there's something breaks, dishwasher breaks, you replace it, and then for some reason it falls out, and it's covered, then it falls out of contract,
But there's still you still paid the service fee.
and so
You still, I don't know about that particular answer. This would be a good question to ask any one of those home warranty people. They all have this similar programs. It's like 60 cents a day or something like that, right? For the, so that they're covered. By the way, errors and emissions insurance companies charge, one of the criteria that they use to determine whether or not they're going to insure an office and how much the office pays and what your deductible is what percentage of your transactions have a home warranty. Right? Now, what that means, what does that mean to a seller? Don't everybody blurt it out at once. What?
Some kind of risk.
So a home warranty, the home insurance, the errors and emissions insurance company will have a lower deductible, lower fees, and more likely to cover you if all of your transactions have a home warranty. Why would an errors and emissions insurance company do that? And the answer is because there's less lawsuits if there's a home warranty. So why would a seller care about that? Is it possible the seller is going to be sued in small claims court by the buyer if the buyer finds something that's broken?
Mm-hmm.
Would the seller like to be done when it's over and not have to come back and defend themselves as to whether or not they knew that the dishwasher was leaking or not? Right? Buy a home warranty. How much does it cost? $400 and 60 cents a day for seller's coverage. But can you see how this form could be used for you to have good discussions? Can you? And then safety precautions. Basically, it says that you should maintain insurance to protect yourself. And then that's the end of the form. Any questions about that? Right. So what I would like you to do, and I know you're all going to be happy with it, is to practice reading the form aloud. Because what we're going to do, I haven't put together the schedule for post there's a week after Michael Sibilia is done. We're going to have some practice writing offers. And then after that, we're going to have practices on buyer consultations, listing presentations, and including how to get each other to sign a listing agreement, right? Which means you're going to have to be able to explain the listing agreement, which means it would be good that you've read. It'd be good that you've read it. All right? Was that enough?